Hello, it's Alex and welcome to Hey Little Thrifter. Today I'm going to be talking about all the books that I read in December. I am currently recovering from the flu, which I got just before Christmas, and yeah, still dealing with it, so excuse the huskiness. First up, I read The Amulet by McDowell, and I read this on my Kindle. This was originally published in 1979 and I believe it was the first novel that he had published. This is a horror novel. This tells the story of Sarah. She lives in a small town in Alabama and she works at a munitions factory putting together rifles. Her husband is away in the army and he ends up being involved in some horrific accident and comes home to recover. Sarah and her husband were living with his mother, so her mother-in-law. The three of them are living in the house together. The mother-in-law and Sarah do not get on very well anyway, and now that they're dealing with this added drama, things are very tense between the two of them. The mother-in-law basically blames the whole town and everyone in it for what happened to her son, and she introduces this amulet which she passes on to someone under the guise of being a gift, and horrific things start happening. Whoever is in possession of the amulet wants to kill other people or kill themselves, so there are a lot of really bizarre murders happening in this small town. No one knows what's going on, and the fact that they're all so out of the blue and crazy, they just don't know what's happening. And eventually Sarah puts two and two together, and even though she realises it's such a crazy idea, she knows that it's because of this amulet, and she knows that it's because her mother-in-law gave it to someone, and that started this whole chain of events happening. This is set, I think, in like the 1950s, maybe 1960s. I can't remember if it was explicitly stated or not, if I've just forgotten, but it definitely seemed to portray that era and the feel of a small town and its inhabitants really well. The deaths and horrific events were all really well done, and some of them were particularly gruesome and quite disturbing. Even though the book wasn't very long, I did find it got quite repetitive after a while, but overall I did like his writing a lot. I definitely want to read more of his stuff, and I did really enjoy the ending. Obviously don't want to give anything away, but I thought it was quite satisfying. I ended up giving it 3 stars out of 5. Next up, I read Byrd Box by Malerman. This was one I also read on my Kindle. This is a horror novel that came out a few years ago, and since then I have only heard great things about it, and I've been meaning to read it since it came out, but I just haven't got around to it for whatever reason. This tells the story of Mallory, and when we first meet her, she is with 2 young children and they are confined to a house. They have blankets on the windows and they wear blindfolds anytime they have to go outdoors. The story is told over 2 different time periods. So we have the current time period with Mallory and the 2 young children, and then we go back 4 years to when Mallory is pregnant, and across the world there are all these reports of people going crazy and killing other people, killing themselves, and it starts to spread across the world, and apparently it's all happening because people are seeing something that is causing them to go crazy and do these things, but no one knows what it is. They just know it is happening and that they need to not see it in order to survive. So the story is told over these 2 different time periods. In the past period, Mallory ends up moving into a house with a few other people. They've all come together in order to survive together basically and kind of pool their resources. So they're living in this house, they have a bunch of canned food in the basement, and they're just trying to survive. they're also trying to make contact with any other people out there. And the story also, alongside that, tells about Mallory in the present day with the 2 young children, and she is planning to leave the house with the kids and get in a boat and travel somewhere, and things have been building up to this day and she's finally ready to do it. She's planned as much as she can and she's ready to go out on the river. It was hard not to go into this book with really high expectations because I haven't heard any bad things about it, basically. I've only heard really good reviews, and I did try to temper my expectations because otherwise you're just setting yourself up for a fall, basically. I did really enjoy it. I'm not sure I thought it was as amazing as I've heard people say. The story itself was definitely intriguing, and I did like the 2 different time periods, going back and forth between those, and it revealing more and more about what's happening. I honestly don't know if I really liked Mallory as a character, and some of the other characters I did feel were quite flat and they were a bit interchangeable because they didn't really have much of a individuality going on. There are definitely some really creepy and tense moments in the story which I really enjoyed and I thought were really well written. Overall, I did quite enjoy it and I gave it 4 stars out of 5. Next, I read another bit of horror, because why not? And this is Uzumaki by Junji Ito, and this is a Japanese graphic novel, and this is like a bind-up of the whole series in one thing. This tells the story of a small town in Japan, and it's basically cursed by spirals. And that just sounds really bizarre, but it's very intriguing, it's very well told, the illustrations in here are all fantastic, and the main character in this is a teenage girl called Kiri, and her boyfriend Shuichi is becoming more aware that weird things are happening and they all seem to be involving spirals. But no one really believes him, but eventually more and more things happen, and Kiri also starts to realise that weird things are going on and that it's all related to spirals. So each chapter of this is almost like a mini story in itself. We're generally focusing on one weird spiral related incident at a time, and some of these are definitely really gross, disgusting, dark, disturbing, mental, like, yeah, they're pretty out there. So if you're not into gruesome stuff, I do not recommend this. So this is pretty huge, but with it being a graphic novel, you get through it pretty quickly, and I just read this in a few sittings, but just to give you an idea of what's going on in there, it's yeah, really great black and white illustrations for the most part, and it's definitely a dark one. If you're looking for something different that is dark and disgusting at times, then I would highly recommend it. I gave this 4 stars out of 5. And last up, I read Hide and Seek by Jane McFann, kind of the other end of the horror spectrum here. This was one of the point horrors that came out in the 90s. This one actually came out, I think, a bit after I had kind of got a bit old for them, so I never read this back in the day, but I got this copy recently because I'm collecting them all, because apparently that's what you do in your 30s, you go back and collect all the things you didn't have when you were a kid. Anyway, this one I read because I got the flu and I spent a couple of days in bed just generally feeling like death, and I wanted just something easy to read and something a bit nostalgic that I could just curl up in bed with. So I picked this one off my shelf. Like I say, I'd never read this one before, and this was actually a bit different to your typical point horror book. Usually it involves a teenage girl at a high school and creepy things start to happen to her, and there's usually some stalker or ghost or weird thing going on. That there are kind of plenty of almost jump scares throughout, and eventually, you know, it's revealed towards the end who it was. It's always the best friend or something that, you know, they didn't realise deep down hated the main character. Anyway, this one was actually a bit of a different setup. It's told from the point of view of Lisa, who is, yeah, a teenager in high school, and she is currently hiding from someone who, like literally hiding in a forest from someone who is trying to catch her and probably kill her. And while she's hiding, she is going back over her memories of her childhood with her family, and she had a very strained relationship with her father. And so the bulk of the story is actually all of these flashbacks where she's remembering all of these different instances where they would argue and he never showed any love towards her. So she's processing all of this through her memories, and then eventually it kind of comes together towards the end with more of a reveal on exactly what's going on in the present day. So the horror or thriller aspect didn't really come together until towards the end, and it's hard to say much about it because otherwise it would give it away, but it was an interesting concept, and for a point horror book it was actually quite well written. Some of them can be pretty sketchy. One thing I didn't like about it was there's a bit of a forced love interest, and the main character clearly isn't really interested, but this guy just won't leave her alone. But he's supposed to be like this sensitive guy, and you know, in time she'll learn to realise how awesome he is and how much he cares for her, and then she'll fall in love with him too. And it's like, dude, no, that's just not how it works. Please don't do that. So yeah, a bit of a mixed bag. Not what I was expecting, but it was quite well written. So yeah, it was an okay read, and I gave it 3 stars out of 5. So that was everything I read in December. Let me know what you're reading at the moment, or if you have any recommendations. Thank you ever so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it, and hopefully I will see you again in my next video. Bye!